All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our program, Public School Safety and Security without On-Site School Resource Officers. We are really glad to have you here tonight with us at the Arlington Committee of 100. My name is Hannah Dannenfelser, and I'm the chair of our board for the Arlington Committee of 100, and I'm going to serve as your moderator for this evening. For those of you newly joining us this evening, the Arlington Committee of 100 is an all-volunteer organization with a mission to foster open and vigorous discussion of timely community issues. We're focused on providing nonpartisan information on the issues of the day to community members and community leaders. If you're watching us on Facebook Live and you think this is something that your friends would like to hear, we'd really appreciate it if you would share that Facebook Live on your page to your friends. You can also like our Facebook page to stay in touch with us. We publish our events through email announcements as well as Facebook events, and we love to keep seeing you month after month. If you are tuning in tonight, I assume you are very well aware that the issue of school resource officers in local schools is a major topic of discussion in Arlington as well as with our neighbors. This is a part of a conversation that has been especially pronounced in the last year about the role of police in our communities and systems. You may know that in June, the Arlington School Board voted unanimously to remove the police officer unit called School Resource Officers from the halls of Arlington Public Schools. This was based on a recommendation by Superintendent Dr. Duran and a work group that spent the last year studying the issue. And excuse me for one moment, I apologize. I have some notes that I am working on pulling up here to make sure I get my information right. We're going to hear, yes, tonight we're hearing from Barbara Cannon, who is the chair of our Arlington School Board, Wayne Vincent, who is our Deputy Chief of Police for the Community Engagement Division. They are going to be discussing the relationship between Arlington Public Schools and the Arlington County Police Department. An important component of this conversation is the Commonwealth's Attorney Office in Arlington. This is where often students may end up in that process. The Commonwealth Attorney employs a number of strategies, including traditional prosecution or a restorative justice model, which has been a signature priority of our current Commonwealth Attorney, Parissa Tafty. We'll be hearing from Parissa and her colleague, Kimiko Leidy, to discuss the role of the Commonwealth Attorney and restorative justice model in evaluating the future of public safety for students in Arlington. I just gave you a brief summary and overview. I left out many details for the discussion, and our panelists are going to fill that in and do a far better job of explaining than I just did. I want to acknowledge and thank our program committee led by Delegate Patrick Hope and our vice chair, Jerry Laporte. This month's program was put together by myself and fellow board member Jeannie Broyhill, so thank you very much, Jeannie, for all of your work. I really appreciate it. We have some elected officials in the audience here with us today. We have Delegate Patrick Hope, and we have school board chair, Barbara Cannon, who is our panelist. If I have missed you when I was looking through the audience and you are an elected official with us tonight, please send a message in the Q&A, and I would like to welcome you and greet you and thank you for being here. If I missed you, I just want to apologize in advance. We do our best to check those lists, and sometimes we're moving a little quick. I also want to ask you to mark your calendars for next month on November 10th, where we'll be doing a debrief from the November elections. We'll be hosting Matt Hurt from the Arlington GOP, Jill, I apologize. If you're here with us tonight, I think I'm going to mispronounce your name. So I'm looking forward to you correcting me at some point next time we see each other. Jill Cayasso, who is the chair of the Arlington Democrats, and Dave Ramadan, who wears many different hats, including as an adjunct professor of George Mason University. He's going to just color in some information around the election in our debrief. So for tonight, we're going to have Barbara, and then Wayne, and then Parissa and Kimiko will co-present, followed by a Q&A. If you're with us on Zoom, you can submit questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we're going to get to as many questions as possible. I always warn everyone, we do not get time to answer them all. I get to as many as we can. I encourage you to keep your questions concise and ask them in the form of a question to increase the likelihood that I'm able to ask your question. You may have noticed in the marketing materials, we've extended this program by 15 minutes this month. We are anticipating a high volume of questions for this conversation. I know it's especially been a hot topic this particular week, so we wanted to give a little bit more time for you to engage with our panelists. One thing I want to highlight, actually, we have an ongoing conversation with our board and our program committee that we always wish we could get more and more time with our panelists and with our Q&A. But we also want to respect your time, that we realize it's a Wednesday night and we know you have a lot on your plate. If you have any reactions to the length today, I'd be happy to hear them. You can shoot me an email. The email address is on the website. I'd be happy to share that with our board and our program committee if you have input. All right. I'm going to go ahead and kick it off to Barbara Cannonen. Barbara is the chair of the Arlington School Board, and she has a little bit about her. She has her PhD in Natural Resource Economics from the University of California at Berkeley. She is also, so Barbara, I didn't know this. I looked at your bio and I thought this was fun, that you are an accomplished children's author. So take a look for Barbara's book. She and her husband, Kevin, have lived in Arlington for almost 30 years, and their two sons both went through Arlington Public Schools. Barbara is a founding board member of the Youth Ultimate League of Arlington and a member of Eco Action, the Arlington Historical Society, the Columbia Pike Revitalization Organization, of course, the Arlington Committee of 100, and she's part of the Friends of the Arlington Public Library and the NAACP. So Barbara is out in the community on a regular basis and wears many, many hats, including as a regular attendee for us every month. I always love getting to shout her name out when we acknowledge our elected officials. So Barbara, thanks for being here tonight. You're on.
Hannah, thank you so much. And, you know, I've told you privately, and I wanted to get the chance to tell you in front of this group, I do think you've done an amazing job in moderating these forums, these virtual forums. So congratulations for that. And thank you so much. And good evening, everyone. I know we're not in person, but I'm looking forward to engaging with you as we move forward this evening. Just want to thank you all. You have all been stalwarts and champions in supporting and being interested and engaged with Arlington Public Schools year in and year out. So looking forward to the evening. So my role this evening is to talk about the school board's vote this past June regarding SROs and the next steps. But I believe the most important part of the story, and the part I want to spend the most time on in my opening comments, is all the work we did over the course of the last 5 or 6 years to invest in student supports, safety enhancements, and emergency management. We'd also spent an entire year just a few years ago before COVID discussing our relationship with our school resource officers and revising our MOU, our Memorandum of Understanding, with them. So there was a lot of background work that had been done, and I believe that background made us uniquely well situated to think about the next step regarding SROs. And I want to emphasize that. I regularly engage with school board members around the Commonwealth and in our neighboring school districts, and we were uniquely situated and prepared because of the work we had already done. So let me start with that. First, regarding emergency management. So 3 years ago, the Committee of 100 had a forum on student safety, and you all had invited our emergency manager, Zach Pope, to speak at that. At that time, he was a fairly new hire, and he shared that he was the first ever APS emergency manager. So right there, that was one of the many steps we had been taking to develop our emergency and safety protocols. His job is to work comprehensively across our system to do safety audits and other things. I went back and watched that forum to prepare for tonight, and much of what he shared with you is the same stuff that I'm going to share with you. It's absolutely worth going back over, and also these are all continuing initiatives. So he talked about research-based, community-based best practices for violence prevention, and there's basically a three-legged stool for best practice prevention. So the first leg is threat assessment. Research has shown that when a young person is contemplating an act of violence, they will exhibit unusual, concerning behaviors, often in the school setting, and they will often talk about to others what they may be contemplating. So the key is for our school staff to know our students, to recognize when behaviors are unusual. So that's about relationships in our schools, and that is one of our biggest priorities, especially now. Then we need someone to put together those pieces to understand the impending threat. And that is exactly what our threat assessment team does. They meet regularly, and their job is to recognize those threats and address them before they happen. So the second leg is student supports and mental health resources, and many of which we've put into place to keep our school climates as healthy as possible. So we have best practice staffing for psychologists, social workers, guidance counselors, substance abuse counselors. We have mental health first aid training, a K-12 social emotional learning curriculum, initiatives to address anti-bullying, no place for hate, healthy relationships. We have a new school climate coordinator who is working on building our work in restorative justice, trauma-informed practices, positive behavioral interventions. You can probably tell by now that I could go on and on with the list of things that we've been doing, work we have done. If you're really interested, we are talking about this very topic at our school board meeting tomorrow evening. We get an annual update regarding these initiatives and our work to support our students. There's a lot going on there, and that continues. So the third leg of that three-legged stool is our facility upgrades, our buildings. A person cannot walk into our school buildings today. They have to buzz in from outside. They have to go to the office. There's an ID system. So there are a number of things we've put in place to enhance our physical security, work with our buildings. So the next thing I want to share is that we had done a lot of work 4 years ago, the school year 2017, 2018. It was actually the last time I was chair. And we had heard then community advocacy. We had recognized ourselves through student matters that came to us, a number of things. First, that it's very important for students to know their rights when they're interacting with police. But second, that it really was the presence of police officers in our schools that were sometimes leading to interactions between students and police that might then lead students to get into deeper trouble than we were necessarily comfortable with. So the bottom line is that SROs in our buildings, they're one of the few professionals in our buildings who do not work for the school system. They work for the police department. And that's a very important distinction because the mission of the police department is different from the mission of a public school system. So as educators, we want students to stay in school. We want them to build up their skills. We want to build their social emotional skills. So we recognized that we had work to do then. And my board colleagues at the time, Nancy Van Doren and Tanya Talento, took the lead in the work. They worked with our staff, with the superintendent. The County Council of PTAs was very involved. And we worked on a new memorandum of understanding with our police regarding our SROs. And that MOU drew a bright line to make clear that those day-to-day disruptive student behaviors do not rise to the level of police involvement. And it was very important for the police not to interact with our students for those day-to-day type matters, that they should get involved if a crime is committed, but not those day-to-day school type events. So that was a very important step that we already had put into place. That was pre-COVID. So there wasn't a lot of time after that was put into place before our buildings were closed for COVID. But then in the last year, as you all know, and the subject of tonight is that this past year, through the leadership of our former chair, Monique O'Grady, and our superintendent, Francisco Duran, and his staff, we did begin the SRO work group process. That involved a large group, a diverse group of stakeholders, including APS staff, parents, advocates, students, and the police. And they worked together, probably by the time we got the charge put together, and they came to work. They worked together for probably about 6 months. They brought us a report. It's very rare to see a work group come together and bring a report that has very little dissent. But they brought us recommendations that the superintendent agreed with. He brought us his version of those recommendations. And we ultimately did vote 5-0 to support his recommendations. I'm not going to tell you there's kind of 6 points to what we voted on, but it boils down to that APS would continue our longstanding relationship with the police, but that officers would not be located in our school buildings. We would reimagine the services that SROs perform, and we would possibly rename the SRO program to a new name. So that's actually where things are as of today. The next step is that an MOU is being developed between APS and the police that will reimagine that relationship. A big part of that is that the police come and teach some of our classes. especially in driver's ed and family topics. So that work is underway, and we expect to hear a report on that sometime this winter. So I will leave it there for now. With that, I'm looking forward to hearing from the other panelists and for engaging with you all this evening. Thank you, Hannah.
Perfect. Thank you, Barbara. And I have a mea culpa here. Parissa, you were probably laughing at me as I was announcing our elected officials, because as many of you know, our Commonwealth's attorney here in Arlington is actually an elected position. And I apologize about that, Parissa. So one of our panelists tonight, Parissa Tafty. And I heard, and I did see that Takis Karatonis from our county board has joined us. So Takis, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to our next speaker, Wayne Vincent. Wayne is the deputy chief, newly the deputy chief of the Community Engagement Division in the Arlington County Police Department. He was recently promoted from a captain's role. He is a 25-year veteran of the police department, and his role is focused on strengthening relationships in the community with police. I've gotten to know Wayne over the years, especially with his work with the 9/11 5K that just happened last month on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. I know that's a personal passion for him, among many other community initiatives that he's been a part of. So Wayne, I will hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And thank you again for the invitation tonight. I'm truly honored to be here tonight with all of you. It's been a couple of months since I was last with the Arlington Committee of 100. And like Barbara said, I look forward to being with all of you face to face soon. As Hannah said, I'm currently serving as the deputy chief of our new Community Engagement Division. Our division includes both youth, business, and our community outreach units. And I'll just start by saying, this past June, as Barbara said, when APS decided to end the school resource officers unit, the police department had to reimagine, as we like to say, how exactly we're going to continue to engage with our youth. And that was not only challenging for us, but again, I think it provided us an opportunity to really change our current philosophy from being school-centric approach to a community-based strategy, allowing us to expand the reach of our youth outreach and engagements efforts in the community. Our youth outreach unit, it works collaboratively with other county agencies and community groups who already work with our youth and relationships to build relationships and support initiatives and educational campaigns designed to keep our youth safe. Already our team, which comprises of 4 officers right now, is working with youth throughout our community in different things like our based affordable housing groups, our parks and recs, sports teams, and even our juvenile and domestic courts, relations courts. In the future, as we move forward, we're looking at building, again, expanding our camp programs, such as our well-known AC STEP, our safety camps, and even a teen community academy. Now, there's a lot to talk about since with other things going on since the removal of the SROs. And as Barbara said, right now we're working collaboratively with APS to redo our current MOU. We anticipate that the MOU will be completed sometime, hopefully, before the end of this year. And again, while we're still doing that, we're still working with APS. We continue to meet with leadership from APS, weekly, monthly meetings as it pertains to the safety of our school community. And we're going to continue to do that. And that will certainly be a part of the MOU. I also want to say that even although we're not in the schools full time anymore, we've already started to, again, engage with our youth in the school, not 100%, but partially, shall we say, in different educational programs, such as substance abuse, and again, something like driver's ed. So I'm going to end there because I know there's probably a lot of questions, and I want to leave enough time for my fellow panelists, but I look forward to the conversation and certainly the Q&A. Thank you, Hannah.
Great, thank you, Wayne. We appreciate it. All right, I'm going to introduce here. We have Prissa and Kimiko are going to co-present here. Kimiko Leidy was hired in December of 2020 to coordinate the development of restorative justice practices in Arlington County. So her role is around bringing restorative justice practices to Arlington's legal systems, school systems, and community contexts. She works across the community to implement the Restorative Arlington Strategic Plan. She also has a master's in she has a lot of things, so I'm going to list these off. A master's in interdisciplinary studies and conflict analysis and resolution from George Mason University, She also holds certificates in restorative justice facilitation, peace circle keeping, organizational development and conflict resolution, and is the Judicial Council of Virginia General District Court certified mediator. She also is a mom to a student in Arlington Public Schools. So we've got a couple parents here. She is co-presenting with Parissa Tafti, our Commonwealth's attorney here in Arlington. She was elected to a 4-year term back in November 2019, and she oversees actually both Arlington and the city of Falls Church. She came into the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office with a 20-year record of criminal justice reform as an innocence protection attorney, a public defender, and also a law professor. And her JD is from the New York University School of Law. Prior to her role here, she served as the legal director for the Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project, where she successfully helped exonerate innocent individuals in DC, Virginia, and Maryland incarcerated for crimes that they did not commit. For those of you who know Parissa and have followed her story over the years, you know that she's really brought the vision and the implementation of the restorative justice model in the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, as well as really has a vision for working with Kimiko to bring it throughout Arlington. So I will turn it over to the two of y'all. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you everyone who's joining tonight. Did you want to say anything, Parissa, before I start the presentation?
No, just thank you for having us, and I'm excited to be jointly presenting with Kimiko. I think it might be the first time we're actually presenting together. And also, I'm a mom of 2 kids at in APS schools. So,
thank you for highlighting that, Parissa.
All right, so I'm going to start the slides. Share my screen. And I'm going to put it in presenter view. All right, so to start us off, I'm going to offer a quick video about restorative justice. So Hannah, just let me know if everyone can hear this.
If crime hurts, then justice should heal. That's Fania Davis. It makes sense, right? Unfortunately, that's not what we're doing. In the US, there are 2.2 million people behind bars and nearly 5 million on probation and parole in a system of mass incarceration laden with racial injustices that disproportionately affect minority communities. 1 out of every 14 children has a parent in prison, destroying the health, stability, and resources of entire communities. This is the retributive justice system, and it operates on the theory that punishing people for crime makes them stop. It's hugely expensive, destructive to the human spirit, and worst of all, it doesn't work. Psychiatrist James Gilligan even calls it the most powerful stimulant of violence that we've yet discovered. People are looking for another system. Fortunately, there is one. It's called restorative justice. It focuses less on punishing the crime and more on holding people accountable in order to heal the harm. Restorative justice is based on who we really are. We're designed to live in community, to be of service to one another, and to nurture and repair our relationships. Where the retributive system asks, who did it, what rule was broken, and how do we punish them? Restorative justice asks, what is the harm? Who has been harmed? How do we repair it? Here's how it works. All the stakeholders get a chance to be heard in a facilitated process that balances the needs of victims, offenders, and the community. The person harmed explains how he or she was hurt. This itself is healing as it meets the need for acknowledgement, validation, and repair. The person who did the harm is held accountable in a new way. They're also given the opportunity to accept responsibility for their actions, which is also healing, share their perspectives, and to make amends for the harm they caused in the relationships that were broken. The whole community has a chance to address the underlying problems that gave rise to the situation, and then everyone works together to find a way to restore balance and offer healing to all stakeholders. In restorative and community justice, the concept of beloved community and living in right relationship is key. You're restoring justice and just relationships within the whole community. Does it work? Well, look at this. In the prison system, wherever restorative justice is tried, recidivism has plummeted. In schools, switching to restorative justice drops suspension, improving students' educational and social well-being while reducing bullying and other manifestations of violence. And it costs next to nothing by comparison. One teacher said, "Every time I used the retributive system, I lost a relationship. Every time I use this new system, I gain one." Restorative justice is justice that works, justice that transforms, justice that heals. Now that sounds like something we all want more of in our communities, so spread the word in yours. If crime hurts, then justice should heal.
Thank you for watching that. So a little bit of quick information about Restorative Arlington. This is a countywide effort to bring restorative justice practices to the legal system, to our schools, and to our community. So last year, 3 working groups comprised of 45 community members, stakeholders, and system partners met for more than 1,300 person hours over 6 months to create the strategic plan, which was accepted by the county board in November 2020, and you can read that on our website. This year, we have partnered with well-established restorative justice programs around the country, as well as system partners here in Arlington and community and faith-based organizations to begin to implement the strategic plan. I want to note Restorative Response Baltimore and Restorative DC are primarily schools-based RJ programs that have expertise in doing schools work, work with students, work with educators and administrators, and work with parents and families. And they've already begun doing training and engagement work with our staff here in Arlington County and APS. We also have a really compelling and unique partnership with our local university, George Mason University's Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution. We have gotten interns from Mason. They are working on, they are offering training for us. We've had 2 circle trainings that both included APS staff. They're working on developing certification pathways for restorative justice certification for our educators and our community members. They're also doing comprehensive and ongoing assessment to make sure that everything we're doing here in Arlington County around restorative justice is aligned with best practices in restorative justice. So what is restorative justice? Restorative justice practices have their origins in Indigenous knowledge. Their intention is to deepen connections among people through intentionally inclusive practices that cultivate empathy, trust, and mutual respect. The goal is to respond to a harm by engaging all the affected parties in a collaborative, creative process that enables meaningful accountability through acknowledging and repairing the harm. We also want to support community members in handling conflict in potentially transformative ways and advance equity through a framework that is deeply rooted in the understanding that we are all interconnected and we all have value. So we are building capacity here in Arlington County for the broad range of restorative justice processes, everything from proactive community building, which is really the most important thing, building community and relationships to prevent conflict before it happens, all the way to using restorative justice practices for community conferencing to address harms when they happen. So I am going to pass to Parissa to talk a bit about what accountability means in restorative justice.
Thank you, Kimiko. One of the things that people frequently think that restorative justice is some sort of, get out of jail free or, get off with nothing system. And it's quite the opposite. It's actually a lot harder to engage in the work that is accountability than it is to sort of passively be punished. And a lot of that has to do, and let me just contrast. I mean, I know the video had this in there, but just to contrast the restorative versus the retributive system. The retributive system, which is what we have, asks 3 questions. What law was broken, excuse me, who broke it, and how should they be punished? Whereas the restorative system asks, what was the harm? What does the person harmed need to heal, and who is responsible for that healing? And, if you notice, those questions are centered around the person that was harmed and what they need. And they're centered around real accountability, and making up for what one has done. And those 5 steps are acknowledging one's responsibility. Danielle Surratt calls this truth telling. She says that it's abandoning the sort of normal responses like denial and dishonesty and minimization and excuses, and really exposing yourself to judgment and consequences. Telling the truth can actually start to answer why something happened, which is really the thing that's at the forefront of at the forefront of the minds of most harmed parties. I mean, it's certainly in working with victims, what they want to know why something happened to them. And the system that we have, that's the retributive system, doesn't really, everything is sort of like a block to finding out those reasons and to that kind of truth telling. The second step is acknowledging the impact of one's actions on others. I mean, it's hard. I don't know if you've ever hurt a loved one. It's really hard to acknowledge that you've done harm and live with the fact that you've caused someone harm. And doing that takes away the ability for the person who did the harm to pretend like what they did wasn't really all that bad. It requires listening, it requires building empathy. And this is really a lot harder than actually doing time from the mouths of people who've done both, because it requires a person to face the people whose lives they've actually changed. The third step is expressing genuine remorse, which is absolutely critical for obvious reasons. And it sort of belongs to the world of accountability, this remorse, in a way that can never be a part of the world of punishment. And because punishment is something that someone does to someone else, right? It's, what the prosecutor asks to get imposed, and what the judge imposes, and what the correctional officers do. And it's like an external motivation, right? But remorse actually shifts that external motivation into an internal motivation. So your internal motivation then is not to feel shame. It's not to hurt people. And that internal motivation is a lot more powerful than any external motivation.
Chris, I'm going to just give you a time check. Sorry for the interruption.
Okay, so doing sorry, which hopefully is self-explanatory, is the 4th step, and then no longer committing the harm, which is the 5th step. And that requires not just a sense of self-worth and dignity, but also community supports, so that people can be in a position to not only transform, but also to be able to overcome the barriers to transformation. So I will wrap that up and get to you, Kimiko.
I just want to offer these 2 statistics really quickly. One is that this really awesome study conducted in California, where they've been doing this for a long time, showed that 98.8% of parents or guardians who participated in a process, either as the parent of the young person who was responsible for the harm or the parent whose child was harmed, 98.8% said they would recommend it to a friend. And then this other one from a group in Minnesota that's been doing this again for a really long time, reduced suspensions by 63% using restorative justice. So I thank you so much for the time. I will pause.
Great, thank you very much. All right, if our panelists are, please go ahead and turn your cameras back on. We're going to do our Q&A here. I want to remind everybody that we have that Q&A box. For those of you who are in Zoom, we have that Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. If you have questions for any of our panelists, whether it's for an individual panelist or for the full group, I encourage you to put that in the chat box. Generally, how I'm going to frame the questions is I'm going to, unless they're directed to an individual, I'm going to frame them to the whole group, and I'm going to let you self-select which ones you opt to weigh in on. So Mike is asking about police response and emergency. Basically, he says external security like locked doors doesn't address a student that brings a gun inside and commits a violent act. Without an SRO in the building, the response times and situational awareness are greatly degraded. So how does the MOU going forward address the insider threat when there's not an SRO in the school?
Should I go ahead and take that? Or
Do you want to start, Barbara? And then if anybody else wants to chime in after you, they can go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we have trained staff. We are prepared to deal with, what happens with our students in our schools. If, just like any other building, organization, anyone in Arlington, if something happens, we're going to call the police. And, one of the things I referred to Zach Pope's presentation to you all 3 years ago, one of the things he shared was that, schools are actually one of the most safe institutions we have. I mean, frankly, we are all at that same risk if we walk into a Safeway, if we walk into a post office. I mean, we don't have police presence in all of the buildings anywhere. So we are going to call the police if something like that happens. One of the things when I mentioned physical enhancements in our buildings, a lot of people ask, what are those big numbers outside the doors? Our buildings are big, and one SRO might be anywhere in that building. But the reason for those big numbers is for any emergency vehicle to get to the location where something's happening as quickly as possible. That's police, that's fire, ambulances, anything. So, we have done everything we can to have that connection ready. I don't know if Officer Vincent wants to talk any more about responsiveness in situations like that.
Sure. Can you guys hear me? Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Barbara. Only thing I'll add to that is, and I kind of touched on it a little bit in my opening statement, is, we're going to continue, even though we're not in the schools, every day, we will continue to work with, as Barbara said, Mr. Pope and his safety team, as well as all the school administrators, to make sure that they are prepared, or we do our part to make sure that they are best prepared for emergencies. And of course, internally in the police department, we will continue to also prepare along with our state, federal, local partners in case there is an emergency situation at any of our schools, so we can have a rapid response and take care of the situation as it presents itself, shall we say. So I'm confident that, as things arise, the police department will always be there. I want to be clear because, there was some discussion early during the discussions as far as recommendation from the superintendent to remove the schools, that, we do not have officers stationed or assigned anywhere near any schools. They're on normal patrol, but we're still confident that if called upon, our officers will have a quick response to handle emergency situations.
Hannah, can I just respond very quickly that an ounce of prevention is really worth a pound of cure. And the sort of the tripod of the stools that Barbara was talking about earlier is all about making sure that we never get there to begin with. And I think that that's the most effective tool that we have for keeping our kids safe. But another effective tool is really like common sense gun safety. We sold more guns in this country last year than we ever have in the past before. We are literally drowning in guns. And, getting rid of some of those would help, reducing people's ability to get guns, and eliminating the possibility of creating ghost guns and selling ghost guns, limiting ammunition. These are things that even when all the other things that we do for prevention fail, like if you won't have shootings if you don't have access to guns. And like, it's such an obvious and simple thing that I think is, really lost on us as a country, that like, we don't need to be drowning in guns. And the more guns we have, the more gun violence we're going to have. And there's absolutely no way around that other than reducing guns.
Thanks, all. One reminder I want to give to our audience, if you're a regular with the Committee of 100, you've heard me say this many times, we do ask for questions in the form of a question. And the subtext to that is we generally we're not bringing the commentary from the audience. We really want our commentary from our panelists. So I just want to address that because I do see a lot of commentary in the questions, and I am bringing it just to the questions for the purposes of our panel. Wayne, did you want to add a comment?
No, Hannah, I did, but I just wanted to be thorough because I've gotten a lot of questions about this when it comes to safety in the schools. And I just want to bring up 2 quick points. The first is the threat assessment team. Commonwealth of Virginia mandates that every school have a threat assessment team, shall we say. And that team must include law enforcement. And that team also includes other entities such as counselors, school administrators. In some cases, we even had a representative from the CA's office. And so, the goal of that team is to review and look at cases and to give preventive measures, as Parissa said, moving forward to address as those situations arise. Additionally, the state also requires every school to do lockdown drills every year. It's 4 a year. It's required the schools complete those 4 a year. The state does not mandate that police have to do them with the schools. In the past, when we were in the schools, we did do it with our APS community, our staff, but we're not going to be doing it with them this year. But again, the state mandates the schools do those lockdown drills. I just wanted to put that out there in case people were wondering.
Thank you. Sonia asks, what situations will trigger a school to call the police?
I guess that.
Barbara, if you want to start
Barbara,
off, I'll follow you up if you want.
Some kind of event where there's a safety threat. Most student events are confidential, so I can't point to different things that might have happened. There have been situations where events happen in schools, and as a follow-up, parents might call the police to report something, but for the schools, we would do it if there's a safety threat.
Could I ask a little bit more about that, Barbara? Are there types of things, could you clarify types of things that that people might think would lead to a police call that would not? Is that evolving in terms of what would and would not prompt a police call?
I'll just say a few words to that, Hannah, just to make it simple. This past legislation period, state legislation came out with specifics, and Parissa, you may want to chime in, specific crimes that only the schools must notify the police. So, regardless if we were in the schools or not, they've outlined specific reasons and crimes to call the police. And for the most part, without getting into all of them, they're pretty much all felonies. But some of those misdemeanor crimes that may go on in the schools, the schools are no longer required to contact the police. That being said, that does not prevent a student or a parent to contact the police, which we've seen that happen already, either inside the school as well as outside the school.
Great. And one of the questions I've heard in the context of that conversation too is, who makes the call to the police? Is that the principal? Is that the teacher? Who's generally making that call?
I'm going to let Officer Vincent answer that.
Well, Hannah, to be honest with you, it could be anybody, but I assume it'd be a school administrator that decides, who calls the police. The thing that we've outlined to APS is that if they need us, they are to call either our 911 or a non-emergency number. But who calls is really up to that school, shall we say.
Okay. John asks, to the whole group, what localities in the DMV come closest at this time to realizing the evolving vision of Arlington? And can you also kind of comment on how you think that's working in other localities?
I can jump in here and share around restorative justice. DC public schools and DC public charter schools are engaging with restorative justice a lot. They have different issues, they have a different population, but they're further ahead of us in terms of integrating restorative justice practices into their schools. City of Alexandria Public Schools also has a restorative justice program that's been thriving for years and has been highly effective. Fairfax County Public Schools also have a strong restorative justice program that's been going really well for them, both in schools and in the courts. It's hard to say where exactly in the location is sort of closest. Arlington is, you know, our own little unique flower here in our county. We have our own set of strongly held values and goals, and we are doing our best to build our program with our partners rooted in Arlington goals and Arlington values and what Arlington County community members are telling us they want us to prioritize.
And what we're doing in Arlington also, I want to point out, is really quite unique in two different respects. The first is that it's truly ground up, you know, like we started with these, you know, work groups and learning and listening sessions to really understand what people want. And so this is like truly grassroots in the way that it's forming and being responsive to people. Another thing that we're doing that's really unique to Arlington and something that's really important to me personally is, you know, I could have just created, I could have just started like identifying cases and sending them to, you know, various organizations and nonprofits that facilitate restorative justice circles. But you know, I didn't do that because I think it's really important. And I think if we're going to be really centered on the people who are harmed, I think it's really important to create, and also if we're going to really change culture, right? It's important to have restorative practices in schools, a place in the community where people who don't want to report crimes to law enforcement and to the prosecutors have a place to go, because 50% of violent crimes are not reported. And I think that it's really important to recognize that those are half of the people who are suffering from violent crimes would rather have nothing than all of the things that the police and my office can offer them, right? And it's a bit of an indictment on our legal system, but having a place in the community where people can go who don't feel comfortable reporting, I think is really important. So having this sort of trifecta of places where you where you can get restorative practices is, I think, really important. And it changes the culture. Like when we're starting to bring these practices into schools, we're literally changing the way that the next generation perceives conflict and problem. And I think that that is really important, particularly for a place like Arlington, where we have so many blessings to take the lead and to start doing.
And I'm just gonna add that I agree with Kimiko and everyone else that, you know, Arlington is unique. You know, we've known over the last year or so that several jurisdictions some have kept SROs, some have taken away the program, some have done something in between. But what I like to focus on for us, and I've said a little bit about it, is, you know, I think we're one of the few jurisdictions right now that have a youth outreach unit that their primary focus is to engage with our youth. And that's so important to us. You know, our team is small right now at 4 officers, 2 former SROs, but, you know, our intention as we build our staff is to increase that unit, because we think we know from our experience, having over 40 years in relationship with APS, we understand and we know that that many times, especially in those elementary and middle school kids, that their first experience with law enforcement, a positive one, is with their SRO. So we're now losing that. And so that's why it's so important to us to really, really reimagine and build out our youth outreach program. You know, we've been researching what other departments are doing, and there are a lot of departments around the nation that have some kind of youth outreach program. But we like to think that, you know, we're gonna build ours and hopefully be a model for the country. And I think a part of that is working with APS through that MOU by the end of the year.
And Wayne, you kind of started answering one of the questions already, and I'm just going to ask if you have anything you want to build on with it. We have a question about how do we promote positive interactions and relationships between police and youth? Is there anything you want to add on that?
Sure. Well, I don't want to take up, you know, all of our time. I could talk about that forever, but, you know, it's important, you know, in the police department, ACPD, we've had some form of community policing for well over almost 20 to 30 years now. And, you know, and I think under our chief's leadership, Chief Penn, when he decided to, you know, instead of just having a few units here and there, he decided to put it under one division with an executive leader. And with that, I think, you know, my focus, our mission to our section or our division, is to engage with our youth and our entire community. I think only through engagement will you build relationships, and only through relationships will you build trust. I mean, that has been proven time and time again. I'm a 100% believer of that. Our staff is, our department is moving to that culture slowly but surely. And I think restorative justice is a part of that. You know, I will just say this, I've not had the chance to be briefed by Kimiko, my team has yet, but what I've read, I think there was certainly a place for restorative justice, and especially as it pertains to our juveniles. But for us, it's that engagement, relationship building, and of those natures that are going to continue to make those positive relationships with our youth and our community, for that matter.
Barbara, Brisso, Kimiko, would any of y'all like to add to anything that Wayne just said?
I think he covered it. It's, you know, everything with youth are about relationships and building trust. And, you know, everything that we've been talking about, you know, and even your previous question about whether we're a standout in our region, I would say on the school side, you know, separate from what we just asked about the police, you know, absolutely. We have so many ways that we're investing in more adults being part of children's lives, being mentors and, you know, trusted people in their lives. And so it's the same. It's the same formula, whether you're talking about police or teachers or, you know, any other adults in these children's lives.
So one thing we have a question here that I'm sure all of you were anticipating because the news has been breaking really quickly over the last 24 hours, 72 hours, is that Alexandria just had a vote to restore their SROs. And it was partially, the comment here references that it was partially in reaction to recent events, including a student bringing a gun to school last week. The question is a hypothetical, which I realize is a hard question to put out there, but is a question from the audience. If that were to happen here, do you think that's something that would prompt SROs to be restored, similarly to our neighbors in Alexandria?
So I'm going to jump in on this one. So thank you for asking this. I actually really want to provide some background on the difference between Alexandria and Arlington. And this is really what I was alluding to in my opening comments when I said that we were in a unique position. I was talking to my friends on this Alexandria school board throughout the process this past year. And, you know, they're all friends. We know some city council members, you know, I don't, you know, it's difficult talking about other jurisdictions in a harsh way. But the fact is that the school board, the Alexandria superintendent did not recommend removing SROs from Alexandria schools for the simple reason that they did not believe they had the resources in place. They felt they needed those SROs for the safety, the same thing that I talked about, how we had other resources to provide safety. The Alexandria superintendent did not believe they were prepared. And the Alexandria school board voted against removing SROs 6-3. One school board member went to the Alexandria City Council and spoke, and this is very rare for us to go and speak at each other's meetings, but a school board member went to the Alexandria City Council meeting and asked them not, when they originally voted, asked them not to vote to remove SROs. So that decision originally was made by the city council against the advice of the school system. So I would say that we're in a different situation. We believe that we have the resources and supports in place to keep our students as safe as possible.
And I'm just going to add something from our point of view. Back in June or prior to June, before APS made their final decision to not have SROs in the schools, Chief Penn made it very clear to the superintendent and our community that if the SROs were removed, they will be reassigned, reallocated, shall we say, and if they were asked to come back, it would take a minimum of 18 months to hire and train and have them return. It's been in the news that we currently have some staffing concerns right now. So again, even with what Barbara said, if we were asked to come back to the schools right now, it would be a minimum of 18 months before we could put staff back in the schools. And as a reminder to everyone, we had 16 SROs, 2 years ago, shall we say? That is almost a shift for a shift any morning, days, or evening, midnight shifts for us. So that is a lot of officers and a lot of resources. And since then, again, they've all been either reallocated or, and actually we've had a few who have since retired.
If I can chime in really briefly,
Yes,
I
please.
want to add that we've been, Restorative Arlington has been hosting community voice circles this month. And the goal of these circles is to hear from community members directly about what safety means to them, what justice means to them, what a sense of belonging and wellness means to them. And what we hear over and over again from community members directly is that safety is bigger than just physical protection. Safety is emotional wellness. Safety is feeling like you can be authentic in the space that you're in. Safety is feeling like you can make a mistake and then find a way to make it better and fix it without it ruining all of your relationships, right? And so I think that one thing that that Restorative Arlington is really wanting to partner and moving forward with partnering with APS on is making sure that this really comprehensive sense of safety is something that all of our students feel, right? And that when you feel safe in a school, you don't have a reason to bring a gun to school. You don't have a reason to get in fights with your classmates. You don't have a reason to toilet paper the bathroom at your middle school. You feel safe, you feel like you belong, you're part of the whole, right? So prevention, this is another area where prevention is really the goal.
Krista, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I think what I wholeheartedly agree with what Kimiko said, and it's totally consistent with like the victim listening circles that we've had. And also I think, and I don't know this for sure, so correct me if I'm wrong, Barbara, but I think that we were unique in the amount of work and community input that went into the decision-making process and the recommendations. And again, which is not to cast shade on anybody else, but this is a thing that Arlington is really good at, is bringing the community's voices to the table, and then at least more recently, really listening to what the community is perceiving as what they want and need, and trusting the community. So I think that we are in a different position for all of the reasons that Barbara has outlined, and because we have really, none of this was taken without a lot of study and a lot of community input and community buy-in.
We have a few variations of questions. There's a few questions about restorative justice, how it works, a little bit, some tactically oriented questions. I apologize that I'm not doing them all justice, but I'm going to try to consolidate them for the sake of time. Could y'all speak a little bit about what restorative justice could look like in the schools, And there are questions around one specific way that someone phrased it is, are there downsides to the restorative justice model? Could you speak towards that a little bit?
I think the only downside to the restorative justice model is the downside of having to implement something that's new in any community. That it's going to take us a while as a community to understand what this is, to train ourselves and to train each other to be able to engage with each other in a restorative way, to hire facilitators and train facilitators who can hold conference processes when a harm does happen. So I think the only downside really is that that it takes time for people to get used to a new way of being with each other and a new way of doing things. There are so many studies about restorative justice, and they all say the same thing, that overwhelmingly, wherever restorative justice is implemented, whether it's in the educational system or whether it is in our as a diversion to our criminal legal system, that we see increased satisfaction for people who are harmed and who are healing from a harm. We see decreases in recidivism or repeated harms from the same person, and that we see rebuilding of relationships across the community. I hope that's helpful. In terms of sort of the tactical question of what a restorative justice process looks like, I'm going to give you the super short answer. And I want to ask that everyone remember that this is the abbreviated version, and you can find a lot more on our website. So there are 4 steps. The first step is getting consent from everyone. So if once a harm has been committed, engaging with the person who has been harmed and the person who is responsible for harm and any other community members who were really directly affected, to get consent, because restorative justice has to be voluntary, right? Once those participants agree, yes, this is how we want to address this harm, then we move into a preparation process where we talk about those 3 questions. What happened? Who was harmed and how? What can we do to repair the harm, right? We talk about the goals, the needs for everyone involved, and what it looks like to have a successful process, what that would feel like, what are the necessary conditions for that. Once everyone is ready, because it's voluntary at every step, if everyone still wants to move into a conference, then we bring everyone together and we talk. This is called a restorative justice conference or a restorative circle. And we talk about those 3 things all together. What happened? Who was harmed and how? What can we do to repair the harm? Usually in these conversations, we end up with a plan, a consensus-based plan where the person responsible for harm has agreed to do X, Y, and Z, real, tangible things that directly meet the needs of the person or the people who were harmed in this incident. This has to be realistic. This has to be related to what happened. This has to be time sensitive. It has to be proportional. And it has to really do some work for repairing the harm, right? If everyone agrees to the plan, then we move to plan completion. The facilitators in the case follow it until the plan is completed and report back to everyone who needs to know that this is done. We've completed this process. Restorative justice processes are voluntary, confidential, and self-determined. And I think the self-determination is the most important thing for the work that this does. No one gives anyone a list and says, you have to do these things, otherwise there's a punishment, right? We work together to come up with a plan, a roadmap for how to get back to a place of healing and safety and repair together. And often for someone who's been harmed, the person who harmed them is the most important person in answering questions, in making them feel safe again, in reaffirming that we're all part of a whole, we care about each other, and we're going to make sure that nothing like this happens again together. So I hope that's helpful. It was short. It's a short, boiled down version of a complicated, nuanced process. So yeah.
Thank you, Kimiko. We had a lot of questions. I don't know if y'all can see them. We have a lot of questions around restorative justice and the model and how it works. So thank you. Brisa, were you about to say something?
Yeah, just very quickly, I think the challenge is, really educating people about what it is. And so the fact that there are all these questions about RJ is really exciting because it shows that there's a thirst to learn about it. The one thing I would add is that Kimiko talked about the circle and that's what happens when there is a harm. The sort of concepts of restorative justice and community and restorative practices are something that you can develop, from the day that kids, enter school. And so, you can, in the sort of, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure category, if you're already teaching kids about circles of community and circles of trust and circles of harm, and, you're already giving them that sort of life perspective that restorative justice and importance of community and belonging. If you're already instilling that in the language that the teachers use and the practices that the teachers use in classrooms, you're setting up a situation where you're not even going to get to where the harm is happening, and if you do, it's going to be that much easier to solve it.
Can I just add that an important upside, I mean, I couldn't give any more detail than was just shared, but an important upside to these approaches is that otherwise, one of the standard approaches in schools when a student does something wrong are detentions or suspensions, which take kids out of school. So by definition, any approach that doesn't go to the point of taking a student out of class or out of school is going to be actually beneficial compared to what the alternatives were.
Great. I have a question here that's directed to you, Wayne. Would you say that having the SROs out of the school will have ACPD less connected and able to identify changing behaviors, sentiments, and trends that may lead to violence, since they're not walking in the halls of the school and engaging with the students and the administrators day to day? Do you have any concerns about that?
I mean, that's a tough question to answer because, I think that's almost like, how do you know that? But I will just refer back to two things. Again, one, that we will, by state code, we have to be a part of the school's threat assessment team. And a lot of that is information coming in and the police department being part of those discussions and preventive measures to ensure the safety and security of our schools. Additionally, we can still be a part of, and I believe we still would be a part of, I think they call it their safety security committee. And that's a committee that's always looking at physically how to make our schools, keep our schools safe as well. Additionally to that, I will also add to, again, going back to our new youth outreach unit, which we nicknamed the U. The U is going to be out there in our community along with the rest of our community outreach team. And I think those, again, building those relationships, having those relationships in the community, again, and working also with APS, not that we are school centric, we're more community based now, but we will, and we have been asked to collaborate with APS on an educational basis. So we're not 100% not engaging with our students, but of course we're doing just maybe a lot less in the schools, but more in the community. So I would say that, is it a perfect situation for us? I've made it very clear personally, the chief has, while we are incredibly disappointed that we're not in the schools, I believe that we will be connected to our youth because of the measures we put in place to ensure we engage with them going forward.
Anna, I'd like to jump in on this too, because I know the question was directed to Officer Vincent, but again, this is what I tried to emphasize at the beginning regarding relationships. And the fact is our school buildings are full of professional educators whose job it is to have relationships with students and to recognize those changes and ultimately that would lead to them being able to recognize those kinds of changes in behavior, things to be concerned about. That's exactly what all of our educators are trying to do. And I know I've had this question as well, where people have said, well, the police officers, the SROs are people that students know they can go to maybe report something that's happened to them. But our goal is for students to feel comfortable, have that trusted adult every one of our students have someone they know they can go to share those experiences. SROs are a resource, but they are absolutely not the only resource that students can take advantage of in our schools.
We are getting close to the end of time, so I'm trying to find a question that will be concise as I'm doing my best, and I'm not sure if I will succeed, so we'll give this a try. Steve is asking about what resources APS currently has if a big fight were to break out, or if there was some kind of violence in the school. What are the specifics of those resources that are currently in place to respond?
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, if there were, what resource does Arlington Public Schools have in place if, for example, a big fight breaks out, since there's not an SRO? And what would, in that interim time before police would arrive, what resources specifically are in place at the moment?
So a fight is a really interesting example, right? Because what I said at the beginning was, what we don't want to see are students who are, immature and maybe doing things they shouldn't be doing. We don't necessarily want that first interaction when they're misbehaving in some way to then be with a police officer, which by definition could lead down the path of them, being written up. And they're then formally in the juvenile, justice system. We want to deal with all these kinds of behaviors as best we can as a school system with our professional educators. We have trained staff. We have staff who are trained in diffusing situations, in intervening, working with our students in a variety of ways. So generally, if there are students who are in a fight, that we have staff who will intervene and diffuse those situations.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and does anybody have, I know we talked about a lot of different topics, and in the Q&A, I know we kind of bounced around between a couple different themes. The questions were really, our questions from the audience covered a lot of different topics. So does anybody have a quick summary quick comments you want to add before we conclude for the evening? Is there anything you were trying to say that we didn't get to? All right.
Did you ask the panel to say a few words, closing words, Hannah?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just going to say, well, again, thank you to the Arlington Committee of 100 for the opportunity. Thank you to my fellow panelists. I think from the police department standpoint, especially myself, Chief Penn, as we move forward, our vision for the police department, part of that is collaboration between the police department and, of course, APS and our other regional partners. So, thank you for the opportunity, and to our parents and school community out there, we continue to look forward to work with everyone. Thank you.
I will just say the same thing. Of course, thank you for caring about, the schools and our students. What I want everyone to know at the end of the day is we have lost students since I've been on the school board. As I see the greatest threats to our students, it's self-harm. Drug overdoses, suicide. And of course, there are other safety issues as well. But anyone who thinks that the school board took this decision lightly, or any decision regarding the safety of our students, I can assure you that we know what it's like to lose students. We don't ever want it to happen. And we take our decisions and we think very carefully about what we do, and we make sure that we have those resources in place. We really, really care about every one of our students and the safety of our students. And we know we have felt what it's like to lose them. So please know that that is always on our minds when we make these decisions.
All right, thank you, everybody. Prissa, Kimiko, I'll give you a real quick, we're gonna wrap up as soon as we can, but is there anything you want to add? I don't want to skip over you. No?
Thank you.
Prissa, anything to add?
No, thank you. I mean, I guess, yes, just one brief thing that this is like what we're doing is really transformative in Arlington because we are going from, like as a country, we spend more money on prisons than we do on everything else except for war. So number one, we spend money on war. Number two, we spend money on prisons. And so shifting our focus from a carceral system and investing in our kids and in investing in the sort of feeling of the true belonging and true feeling of safety that Kimiko was talking about, I think is transformative. So thank you for listening, and thank you for everybody who's a part of this.
Wonderful. Thank you all. And thank you all for being here with us tonight. We really, really appreciate it. We know there's a lot of demands on each of your time, and we're grateful that you are willing to spend your Wednesday evening with us here at the Arlington Committee of 100. So I hope we'll see you in future programs as well. I also will invite, for the folks that we still have here on Zoom, if our panelists have any links that they want to stick in to the chat box, please feel free to do that. I saw Wayne just stuck his email address in there. If there's other folks who want to do that, you are welcome to do that. We've probably got about a minute until we close out the Zoom. So audience, check your chat box. I also want to give a quick reminder to our audience for November 10th. Tune in with us again next month. We're going to be doing an election debrief. So we'll be hearing from the Arlington Republicans and the Arlington Democrats, and then Dave Ramadan, who will be speaking as a commentator on how the election has gone. We are really excited for our panelists for next month. The link to register is in the Zoom chat, and it's going to be at 7 p.m. again, November 10th, and I hope to see you there. I want to thank again our program committee for coming up with the content for tonight, for developing who we wanted to invite as our speakers. Especially want to thank Jeannie Broyhill, who helped coordinate, and our program committee co-chairs, Jerry Laporte and Delegate Patrick Hope. We are grateful for your support. If you want to share the recording for tonight, a reminder that it is on our Facebook page, Arlington Committee of 100, and you can share that to your friends and send that along to anyone. We will have the recording on the website. I tell people each month we are an all-volunteer organization, so I do not make commitments on how quickly we get that video on our website. We will get it soon as we can, and I hope, and we'll do our best. So tune into our website later to see the recording of today. We thank you again to our panelists, and I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up for the evening.